Emma was only 7 years old, but she had a heart full of love and a very big dream. For many weeks she had been saving coins, tiny amounts from lunch change, small tips from neighbors, and coins she found on the street. She kept them hidden in a small jar under her bed. Every night before sleeping, she would shake the jar and smile. It was not much money, but it was everything she had. Her plan was simple. She wanted to buy a birthday gift for her mother. Her mother worked very hard. She cleaned offices in the morning and served food at a diner at night. Sometimes she came home late, tired and quiet. Emma always waited for her with a warm hug. They did not have much. Their apartment was small, and sometimes the lights did not work, but her mother always gave Emma love, hugs and stories before bed. Emma thought, "Mom always gives me everything. I want to give her something too." One bright Saturday morning, Emma woke up early. She brushed her teeth, wore her favorite pink dress, and picked up the jar of coins. She walked down the street, holding the jar close like treasure. The city was busy, cars honked, and people rushed past her. But Emma kept walking with a smile. Her heart was beating fast with excitement. She reached the mall after 20 minutes of walking. The mall was big and shiny. She looked around at all the stores and lights. Her eyes grew wide with wonder. She had never come alone to the mall before, but today was special. She was on a mission. She walked slowly, looking through the windows of many stores. Most things were too expensive. Her coins wouldn't be enough for the fancy necklaces or shiny phones. But she didn't give up. Finally, she saw a small gift shop. The window was full of colorful boxes, soft toys, and tiny decorations. Something about the shop felt warm and happy. Emma pushed the door open. A little bell above the door rang gently. The shop smelled like old wood and sweet flowers. The shop owner, an old man with white hair and kind eyes, looked up and smiled. "Hello, little one. Can I help you?" he asked. Emma nodded shyly and said, "I want to buy a gift for my mom. It's her birthday." The man's smile grew even wider. "That's very sweet. What do you have in mind?" She opened the jar and showed her coins. "This is all I have," she said softly. The old man bent down and said, "Let's find something beautiful together." They walked around the shop, looking at many things. There were music boxes, small purses, candles, and bracelets. Then Emma saw it, a silver bracelet with a tiny heart charm. It was simple, pretty, and perfect. She pointed and said, "That one." The man looked at the price tag. It was more than she had. He looked at Emma's hopeful face and nodded. "For your mom. It's just the right price." Emma smiled so brightly it could light up the whole room. She poured her coins on the counter carefully. The man wrapped the bracelet in a soft purple box and tied a silver ribbon around it. "She's going to love it," he said as he handed it to Emma. She hugged the box to her chest. "Thank you, sir," she said with joy, just as Emma was about to leave the shop. The door opened again. This time, someone else walked in. She was wearing a cap and sunglasses, trying not to be noticed, but the shop owner's eyes widened. He knew who she was. She was famous. She was Sandra Bullock, the movie star. But Emma didn't know her. To her, she was just a nice lady walking into the store. Sandra saw the little girl holding the gift box tightly and smiled. Something about the scene touched her heart. She walked over and asked, "What's in the box, sweetheart?" Emma looked up and said, "It's for my mom. It's her birthday today." Sandra knelt down to Emma's level and asked gently, "That's very kind of you. Did you buy it all by yourself?" Emma nodded proudly. "I saved for a long time." Sandra looked into the little girl's eyes and saw something rare. There was innocence, love, and quiet strength. She felt something move inside her, a soft warmth. She asked, "Do you think I could come with you when you give it to her?" Emma blinked. Surprised, "You want to come with me?" Sandra smiled and said, "If that's okay." Emma thought for a moment and nodded. "Okay," she said, holding the box close, and just like that, the little girl and the Hollywood star walked out of the shop together. Two very different people, brought together by a simple act of love. The day had started as a quiet gift-buying trip, but it was already becoming something much more. Something magical was about to happen, and Emma had no idea her life was about to change forever. Sandra Bullock had come to the mall to enjoy a quiet day. She wore a cap, sunglasses, and simple clothes to hide her identity. She hoped no one would notice her. She just wanted a normal day like everyone else, for once. She didn't want flashing cameras or loud fans. She wanted to feel peace, just like regular people, so she picked a small gift shop, hoping it would be quiet inside. As soon as she walked through the door, she saw a little girl standing at the counter. The girl had a big smile on her face and was hugging a small purple gift box. The shop felt warm, with soft light and wooden shelves filled with pretty things. Sandra looked around slowly, but her eyes kept going back to the child. There was something different about her, something sweet and honest. The girl turned and smiled at Sandra without fear or recognition. It surprised Sandra. Most people looked shocked when they saw her, but this little girl treated her like a normal person. Sandra walked over and gently asked, "What's in the box, sweetheart?" The girl answered, "It's a birthday gift for my mom." Sandra knelt beside her, her voice soft. "That's lovely. Did you pick it yourself?" The girl nodded. "I saved coins for a long time. I wanted to get her something special." Sandra felt her heart melt. The girl looked so proud and happy. It was rare to see such kindness in someone so young. "What's your name?" Sandra asked. "Emma," the girl said, still smiling. Sandra sat down on a small bench near the wall and asked, "Can I ask why this gift is so important?" Emma looked thoughtful for a moment, then said, "My mom works all the time. She never has time for herself. I want to make her feel happy, even just for one day." Sandra listened carefully, touched by every word. Emma's words were simple, but full of love. The shop owner, who had been quietly watching, came over with 2 paper cups of water. Sandra took one and offered it to Emma. They sat there together, a little girl and a world-famous actress. But it didn't feel strange. It felt peaceful. The shop owner smiled, knowing something special was happening, but he didn't interrupt. After a few minutes, Sandra asked, "Do you live far from here?" Emma shook her head. "Just a short bus ride." Sandra paused, then said gently, "Would it be okay if I come with you when you give the gift to your mom?" Emma looked surprised. "You want to come?" she asked. Sandra nodded. "Only if you say yes." Emma thought for a moment, then smiled brightly. "Okay." They stood up and walked out of the shop together. Sandra held the door open, and Emma stepped outside first. The sun was shining, and the air felt fresh. Sandra kept her sunglasses on, but inside she felt light, happier than she had in days. They walked side by side through the mall. Some people began to notice Sandra and whispered to each other, but she didn't mind. Her focus was only on the little girl walking next to her. As they walked, Emma started talking. She told Sandra about her life, about her mom working in the mornings and evenings, and about how they lived in a small apartment with just one bedroom. Sandra listened, not saying much. She wanted to hear everything. Emma said they sometimes had popcorn for dinner and made stories with paper puppets to make each other laugh. Sandra felt her eyes getting warm, but she held back tears. "You and your mom sound very close," she said. Emma nodded. "She's my best friend." They passed by shops and restaurants, the smell of food and perfume filling the air, but Sandra wasn't paying attention to any of it. All she saw was Emma's shining eyes and her brave heart. The little girl walked with so much purpose, like she was on the most important mission in the world. When they reached the bus stop, Sandra offered to buy a taxi instead. Emma looked unsure. "Is it expensive?" she asked. Sandra smiled and said, "Don't worry, I have some saved up coins too." Emma giggled, and they both got into a taxi together. Inside the taxi, Emma carefully held the purple box in her lap like it was made of gold. She looked out the window, excited and nervous. "She's going to be so surprised," she whispered. Sandra nodded. "She's going to be proud of you." As the taxi moved through the city, Sandra felt a deep calm inside her. She had gone out today, just wanting to be left alone. But now she was glad she hadn't. She had met a little girl who reminded her what truly mattered. Not fame, not money, but kindness, love, and family. By the time the taxi neared Emma's neighborhood, Sandra had already made a quiet promise in her heart. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing: she would not just walk Emma home. She would do something more, something big. Because this little girl and her mother deserved so much more than just one special birthday. They deserved a better life, and maybe, just maybe, she could help give it to them. The taxi moved slowly through the city streets, passing tall buildings and busy roads. Emma looked out the window with wide eyes. She was holding the small purple box tightly in her hands. Her heart was full of excitement. She kept thinking about how her mother would react. She had dreamed of this moment for so long. Sandra Bullock sat quietly beside her, watching the little girl with a gentle smile. Sandra had been in many movies, met thousands of people, and traveled all over the world. But this ride with a small girl named Emma felt different. It felt special. She wasn't thinking about Hollywood or her next film. She was thinking about a mother who worked hard every day, and a daughter who loved her so much she saved coins. Just to make her smile, Emma turned to Sandra and asked, "Do you think she'd cry?" Sandra laughed softly and said, "Maybe happy tears." Emma smiled and looked down at the gift box. "I hope she likes it. I wanted to get something more shiny, but this was all I could afford." Sandra touched her hand gently and said, "This gift has more love than anything shiny. That's what makes it perfect." As the taxi turned into a quieter part of the city, the buildings started to look older, the roads were cracked, and there were fewer people on the sidewalks. Sandra noticed the difference. The shops were smaller, and some had broken windows. But Emma didn't seem to notice. She was used to it. For her, this was home. The taxi finally stopped in front of a worn-down apartment building. The walls were stained, and the stairs looked rusty. Emma opened the door quickly and said, "This is it." Sandra stepped out slowly. Looking around, it wasn't safe or beautiful, but it had something more important: memories, struggles, and love. They walked up the stairs, which creaked with every step. Emma led the way. Full of energy, Sandra followed, careful not to trip. On the third floor, Emma stopped in front of a brown door with peeling paint. There was no name, just a small number nailed to the wood. Emma took a deep breath and knocked twice. For a moment, nothing happened. Then they heard footsteps from inside. The door opened slowly, and a tired-looking woman stood there. Her hair was messy, and she was still wearing her work uniform. She looked confused for a second. Then her eyes landed on Emma. "Sweetheart?" she said in surprise. "Why are you back so early?" Then she noticed the woman standing beside Emma. Her eyes widened. "Wait, are you?" she began to say, but stopped. Sandra smiled kindly and said, "Hi, I'm Sandra. I met your daughter at the mall." Emma held up the gift box and said, "Happy birthday, Mom." Tears filled her mother's eyes at once. She covered her mouth with her hand and bent down to hug Emma tightly. "You remembered," she whispered. "You saved your money, didn't you?" Emma nodded. "I wanted to make you happy." Sandra watched quietly, her own eyes full of emotion. After a long hug, Emma's mom stood up and said, "Please come in." She looked nervous and embarrassed. "I'm sorry the place is a mess." Sandra shook her head. "It's okay, I'd love to come in." They walked into the apartment. The room was small and had only a couch, a small table, and a tiny TV. A fan buzzed loudly in the corner, trying to keep the room cool. The kitchen was part of the same room, and it had only a few dishes and one loaf of bread on the counter. The walls had cracks and the paint was fading, but none of that mattered to Sandra. She looked around and thought, "This is where real strength lives." Emma gave the gift box to her mother, who opened it slowly. When she saw the bracelet, her hands began to shake. It was simple, silver, and had a little heart charm. She looked at it like it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "It's perfect," she whispered. "I wear it every day." Emma jumped into her arms again, and they hugged tightly. Sandra sat quietly on the couch, feeling something deep in her chest. She had seen powerful scenes in movies, but this was real. This was love, not written by a screenwriter, but by life itself. They sat together and talked. Emma's mom made tea using the last tea bag they had. Sandra accepted it with a smile and said, "You've raised a very special girl." Emma's mom smiled softly. "She keeps me going, even when everything is hard." Sandra nodded slowly, feeling something change inside her. She didn't know what she would do next, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't just leave and forget about them. She had met Emma by chance, but it didn't feel like a small moment anymore. It felt like something big was starting. Something that would bring light to this little home and give Emma and her mother a future full of hope. Sandra sat quietly on the old couch, looking around the tiny apartment. The walls had small cracks, and the paint was coming off in places. The curtains were thin, letting in the soft afternoon light. The room had very little furniture, just a small table, one chair, and an old fan that made a soft buzzing sound. There were no pictures on the walls, no decorations, just a feeling of silence and struggle. Emma sat on the floor next to her mom, smiling proudly. Her mother, Linda, still held the gift box in her hands. She kept looking at the silver bracelet again and again like it was made of gold. Her fingers touched the little heart charm carefully. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice full of emotion. "How did you buy this, sweetheart?" Emma smiled and said, "I saved my coins. I wanted to get you something nice." Linda looked like she wanted to cry again, but she held back her tears and hugged her daughter tightly. "You're the best gift I ever got," she whispered. Sandra felt her chest tighten. She had seen scenes like this in movies, but this was real. This was something deeper, something raw and full of love. Linda stood up slowly and looked at Sandra nervously. "Would you like something to drink?" "I have tea," Sandra smiled and said. "That would be lovely." Linda walked to the small kitchen area and filled a small kettle with water. She moved slowly, tired from a long day at work. Her hands showed signs of hard work, and her feet moved like someone carrying the weight of many days without rest. While the water was heating, Sandra and Emma kept talking. Emma told her about the paper puppet shows they did at night when there was no TV signal. She explained how her mom sometimes skipped dinner so Emma could eat more. Sandra listened closely, her heart breaking and warming at the same time. "You know," Sandra said softly. "You're a little hero, Emma." Emma looked surprised. "Really?" Sandra nodded. "You love big, and that's the bravest thing anyone can do." Linda returned with 2 cups of tea and handed one to Sandra. "Sorry, it's not much," she said. Sandra took the cup with both hands and said, "It's perfect." "Thank you." They sat in silence for a moment, sipping the warm tea. The room was small, but it felt full of quiet love, quiet pain, and quiet strength. Finally, Linda said, "I don't know what to say. I never thought I'd see someone like you in my home." Sandra smiled and replied, "It's not about who I am. It's about what your daughter did today. She reminded me of something very important." Linda looked confused. "What's that?" Sandra took a deep breath. That even the smallest acts of love can change everything. Emma looked up at her mom and said, "I just wanted you to smile." Linda hugged her again. "You gave me the best birthday I've ever had." For a while, no one said anything. They just sat together, feeling something peaceful in the room. Sandra looked at Emma and said, "You're lucky to have a mom like her." Emma nodded quickly. "She's my best friend." Sandra turned to Linda and said gently, "Can I ask you something?" Linda nodded. "Of course." Sandra looked serious but kind. "Would it be okay if I visited you again sometime? I mean, not as a famous person, just as a friend." Linda looked surprised but smiled slowly. "You want to come back here?" Sandra nodded. "Only if you're okay with it. I think I was meant to meet you both today." Linda thought for a moment, then said, "We'd like that. I don't have many friends, especially not ones like you." Sandra laughed softly. Now. You do. As the sun began to set, the room grew darker, but no one turned on the light. The soft shadows made everything feel calm. Emma had fallen asleep with her head on her mom's lap, holding the empty gift box like a treasure chest. Linda gently brushed her daughter's hair away from her face. She's my everything, she said quietly. Sandra stood up and said, I should go now, but I'll be back soon. Linda stood too and walked her to the door. Thank you for today, not just for coming here, but for being kind, Sandra smiled. It's your daughter who taught me kindness today. As Sandra stepped outside and walked down the creaky stairs, she felt something new in her heart. She had come to the mall to hide from the world, but instead, she found a small family with big love. And she knew this was only the beginning. Something important had started today. And it all began with a little girl, a birthday gift, and a surprise meeting that would change everything forever. The next morning, Sandra woke up early, but her mind was not thinking about movies or meetings. She was thinking about Emma and her mother. Linda, the little apartment, the simple bracelet, the quiet strength in Linda's voice, everything stayed. With her, it was like their story had touched a part of her heart that she hadn't felt in a long time. She sat by the window, holding a cup of coffee, and asked herself one question: what can I do for them that really matters? Sandra had helped people before. She had given money to charities and supported big causes. But this was different. Emma wasn't just a name on paper. She was a real child who saved coins to buy her mother a gift. Linda wasn't a stranger. She was a mother fighting every day to give her daughter a better life. Sandra knew she had to do something more than just visit. She wanted to help in a way that would last. She picked up her phone and called her manager. I need to set up something private, she said. A scholarship, a support fund, but it has to be done quietly. Her manager was surprised. Who is it for? He asked. Sandra replied, a little girl named Emma and her mom. I'll explain everything later. Just make it happen. While her team got to work, Sandra sat down and wrote a letter to a close friend who ran a private school. She told Emma's story, how she had saved every coin she could to make her mom smile. She asked if the school would give Emma a chance. She's smart, kind, and brave, Sandra wrote. She just needs a door to open, her friend replied a few hours later. We'd be honored to have her. That afternoon, Sandra drove back to the same neighborhood. This time, she didn't wear sunglasses or a cap. She didn't care if people saw her. She walked up the same stairs and knocked on the same door. Linda opened it with surprise. Sandra, you're back? She asked, smiling. Emma ran to the door and shouted, Aunt Sandy. Sandra laughed and hugged her tight. I told you I'd come back, she said. They sat down together again, just like before. Emma showed Sandra a drawing she made of them at the gift shop. Sandra smiled and said, That's beautiful. I'll keep it forever. Then she looked at Linda and said gently, I came to talk to you about something important. Linda looked nervous. Is everything okay? Sandra nodded. Yes, but I want to help you. Linda blinked, confused. Help? Emmy? Sandra took her hand and said, I want to make sure Emma gets the best education. And I want you to have a chance to rest, to grow, to dream again. Linda shook her head. Sandra, you've already done so much, Sandra smiled and said. This isn't charity, this is love, from one mother to another. Tears filled Linda's eyes. She didn't know what to say. Sandra explained everything, how Emma would get a scholarship to a good school, how she had set up a small fund to help with rent and daily needs, how there would be job training programs available if Linda wanted to study or start fresh. Emma listened quietly, not fully understanding everything. But knowing something big was happening, Linda covered her mouth and began to cry. I never thought something like this could happen to us, she said. We're just a small family. Sandra hugged her and said, Sometimes the smallest families have the biggest hearts, and they deserve the world. Later that day, Sandra asked if she could share Emma's story with the world, not her name or address, but the message of kindness, hope, and love. Linda hesitated for a moment, then said, If it helps someone else believe in goodness, then yes, share it. Sandra went home and wrote a short post on her social media. She didn't mention where or who. Just the story of a little girl who saved coins to buy her mother a bracelet. She reminded me what love truly means, Sandra wrote. Sometimes. Heroes are just 7 years old. The post spread like fire. People from all over the world shared it. Some cried, some smiled. Some said it gave them hope. Sandra didn't expect it to go viral, but it did. And soon, news channels started asking, "Who is this little girl?" Sandra kept their identity private, but the love from people kept growing. Boxes of gifts and letters began arriving at her office. People wanted to send thanks, toys, books, clothes, even handwritten cards. Sandra read some of the letters to Emma the next time she visited. One letter said, "You made me believe in kindness again." Emma smiled shyly and said, "I just wanted my mom to be happy." Sandra hugged her tight and whispered, "And you made the whole world feel something beautiful." That night, as she drove home, Sandra looked up at the stars and smiled. Something small had turned into something big, and it all began with a little girl, a gift, and a heart full of love. It had only been a few days since Sandra Bullock shared the story of Emma and her gift for her mom, but everything had changed. Very fast, people across the world were talking about it. Even though Sandra didn't share their names or address, the story touched millions of hearts. It wasn't about fame. It was about a little girl's pure love and a mother's quiet strength. Sandra watched everything closely, but made sure to protect Emma and Linda's privacy. She didn't want reporters knocking on their door or photographers chasing them. They were not looking for attention. They just needed a little help, a little light in their life. And now, that light was growing brighter each day. One morning, Sandra sat down with her assistant and made another important call. She wanted to make sure Emma and Linda were truly safe and supported. She asked her lawyer to set up a trust fund. It should help with rent, food, school supplies, and anything else they need, she said, and make sure their names stay private. At the same time, Sandra called the head of a nonprofit that helped women like Linda's single mothers working 2 jobs. She explained Linda's story and asked if they could help with job training or part-time work closer to home. The woman on the phone said, "We'd be honored to help, just give us the word." Sandra also asked her friend, a retired teacher, to quietly check on Emma's new school. "Make sure she's happy, make sure she's safe," she said. Her friend visited the school as a guest speaker, then told Sandra later, "Emma's already the favorite student in the room. She's kind, curious, and very smart." Back at the small apartment, things were changing slowly, but beautifully. Emma now had a school uniform, books, and even a little desk where she could do her homework. Linda cried the first time she saw her daughter sitting there, reading with full focus. "I never thought I'd see this," she whispered to herself one afternoon. Sandra returned for a visit. This time, she brought along a small photo album. Inside it were pictures of letters and messages people had sent. They couldn't give out the real address, so all the kind words had come to Sandra's office. She sat on the couch and showed it to Emma and Linda. "Look at what people are saying because of you," Sandra said with a warm smile. Emma turned each page slowly. Her eyes lit up as she read messages like, "You reminded me to hug my mom today," and "Your love gave me hope." Linda sat beside her, holding her hand. "We're just normal people," she said softly. "Why do they care so much?" Sandra replied, "Because the world forgets sometimes what real love looks like, and you reminded them." Then came the most surprising part. Sandra reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. She handed it to Linda and said, "This is something for you." Linda opened it carefully. Inside was a letter offering her a spot in a free training program to learn office management and computer skills. There was also a list of companies who were willing to hire her after she finished. Linda was speechless. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Sandra smiled. "Say yes, and let us help you rise." That night, after Sandra left, Linda sat at the kitchen table holding the envelope. She looked at her daughter, now asleep on the couch with a blanket over her. She thought about the long nights working 2 jobs, the days when there wasn't enough food, and the mornings when she walked to work with holes in her shoes. All of that led to this moment. Because her daughter believed in love, because a stranger walked into a shop and cared enough to stop, she wrote a short note that night, not to Sandra, but to herself. It said, "No matter how dark things feel, love will always find its way. Don't give up." She folded the note and placed it in her wallet. She would carry it with her always, a reminder of where she came from and where she was going. The next day, Linda began her training classes. Sandra quietly arranged for a babysitter for Emma. In the afternoons, everything was planned to make life easier. Sandra visited often, but never made a big show of it. She wanted to be a friend, not a savior. She helped when needed, but more than anything, she just listened. Emma had started calling her Aunt Sandy, and Sandra loved it. Every time she heard those words, she felt like part of something real, something honest, something warm. She wasn't playing a role now, she was living a story, a beautiful one. As weeks passed, Emma's story still echoed across social media. People continued to write poems, letters, and posts inspired by her love for her mom. But the noise outside didn't matter much anymore. What mattered was inside that little home: hope, change, and love. The kind that starts with a bracelet and grows into something the whole world feels. Weeks had passed since Sandra first met little Emma in that small gift shop, but the story was still growing. People all over the world were still talking about it, even without knowing their names. They felt connected to Emma, and her mom. Strangers wrote messages like, "That little girl reminded me what love is," and "I cried reading this story." The world had fallen in love with a child who simply wanted to make her mother smile. Inside their small apartment, life was not perfect, but it was much better now. Emma had started going to her new school. It had clean classrooms, kind teachers, and a small library filled with books. Every morning, she wore her school uniform with pride. Her shoes were new, her backpack was full, and her heart felt lighter. She walked with a quiet confidence that came from knowing she was safe and seen. School, Emma made new friends. The teachers were impressed by how polite, kind, and curious she was. She asked questions in class and always helped others. When one student forgot his lunch, Emma gave him half of hers without saying a word. Her kindness was not something she learned, it was part of who she was. Everyone noticed it one day. The school principal called Linda for a meeting. Linda was nervous at first. She had never been to such meetings before. But the principal smiled warmly and said, "I just wanted to tell you how proud we are of your daughter. She's one of the brightest lights in our school." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "Not of worry, but of joy," she whispered. "Thank you." Linda's life had also started changing. She was attending her job training classes every week. She was learning how to use computers, write emails, and manage office tasks. At first, she felt scared. Everything was new, and she hadn't been in a classroom since she was a teenager. But she kept going, step by step, and slowly. Her confidence started to grow. One evening, as she sat doing homework on her small kitchen table, Emma walked over with a smile and said, "Now I help you with your schoolwork." They both laughed, and it became a sweet new routine: mother and daughter, studying together, lifting each other with every passing day. Sandra continued to visit quietly. She never came with cameras or attention. She always knocked gently and entered like family. Emma would run to her yelling, "Aunt Sandy," and give her the biggest hug. They would sit together, eat simple food, and talk about everything: school, dreams, stories, and sometimes silly things too. Sandra loved those visits more than any Hollywood event because they were real. One day, Sandra brought a small surprise. It was a box filled with letters and drawings from people around the world. "These are for you," she said, handing it to Emma. The little girl opened the box slowly and found pages filled with hearts, kind words, and even small gifts like bookmarks and handmade cards. One letter said, "You made my heart warm again. Thank you, little hero." Emma's eyes sparkled as she read them one by one. Linda sat beside her, holding Sandra's hand. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. Sandra shook her head gently. "You don't need to. You already gave the world a gift. You raised this beautiful soul." Linda smiled. "I just wanted her to be kind. I never thought the world would notice," Sandra replied. "But kindness is the one thing the world never forgets." News channels continued to ask for interviews, but Sandra always said no. She didn't want to turn their life into a show. "This story belongs to them," she told her team. "Let it stay pure." But the story kept spreading anyway. Artists painted pictures of a girl giving her mom a gift. Writers wrote poems. Teachers told their students about Emma as a lesson in love, all without knowing her name, and that made it even more beautiful. Sandra also received offers from companies wanting to donate or help. Some wanted to give scholarships, some offered jobs, some wanted to make movies. But Sandra carefully picked only the things that would truly help Linda and Emma, not just today, but for many years. She protected them like family. As more people heard the story, a quiet kindness began to grow everywhere. Strangers started doing small good deeds in honor of the story. Someone paid for a stranger's meal. Someone else left flowers at a neighbor's door. All of them saying, "Because of Emma." One afternoon, as Sandra sat in the apartment, Emma asked, "Why are people so kind now?" Sandra thought for a moment, then said, "Because you reminded them what kindness looks like." Emma tilted her head and said, "I didn't do anything big." Sandra smiled. "That's the secret, sweetheart. The small things are the big things." And as the sun went down and the sky turned orange and pink, Sandra looked around at the tiny room filled with warmth, laughter, and love. The apartment was still small, but inside, it felt like the whole world was glowing, all because of a little girl, a silver bracelet, and a moment that touched hearts across the earth.